Hey, podcast family. Thank you for being here again with me this week. I invited Adele Johnston back on the podcast for a part 2 discussion about the journey into perimenopause and menopause. So, on this episode, we're going to delve deeper into an often overlooked aspect of this life transition: how the changes in our sex hormones affect insulin, and how to manage weight gain and weight loss, along with overall well being during this time. But let's start at the beginning. Why does it seem like we're putting on more weight during this life transition? Is there a scientific explanation? Well, Adele will share insights into this common concern. We'll also explore how women can navigate weight management in a healthy and sustainable way during this phase of life. It's actually really quite different than it was when you were in your 20s and 30s, that's for sure. Adele will also address why staying active can feel more challenging during perimenopause and menopause, and provide guidance on the type of fitness routines and exercises that can help maintain fitness levels and energy. As always, thank you for being here with me each week, and if this episode was helpful for you, please share it with a woman in your life who might need this information. And of course, while you're at it, I would love nothing more than for you to leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Thank you so much for being here, and enjoy the episode. Hi, Adele. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited for this one. Thank you for having me back.
Yes, of course. Thank you for being here. And, part 1 is all about your personal story. And now we're digging into part 2, which is a little bit more around the nuts and bolts and the nuances of menopause in general. And one of the things that I just wanted you to share a little bit for anyone who may not have listened to part 1 yet is just like a tiny snippet of your story, so that everyone has an idea of what you've been dealing with and, how you came to do this work.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so obviously we covered this in quite a bit of detail in the first part, so I'll keep this short. So yes, I am Adele Johnston, known as the menopause coach, and I went into early perimenopause when I was in my 30s. So early 30s, noticing things were just not quite great. 35, I knew myself that it was hormonally related. And being that I was already in the women's health and hormone space, I recognized that what I was actually experiencing was, in fact, perimenopause. But it took until I was 37, so 2 years, to have that confirmed by the medical teams. Started my hormone replacement therapy journey at 37. I'm now 40. And yeah, it's kind of been that whole whirlwind of recognizing the changes in hormones, dealing with early perimenopause, and not knowing at this point actually whether I am still perimenopausal or postmenopausal, because I actually have the Mirena coil, which I had in place after I had my twin daughters because I didn't want another pregnancy. So I used that for my contraception. And it acts very well for me as a synthetic part to my HRT hormone progesterone. So we don't know whether I am postmenopausal right now. And quite frankly, for me, because of the journey that I'm on right now, it's not relevant in the grand scheme of things for me to take out the Mirena to figure that out. So hormones are feeling very happy right now, and I don't want to muck about with them.
Well, I feel like many people can relate to the fact that if your hormones are feeling good, then you just, like you said, you don't really mess with it. You don't fix what's not broken kind of thing.
Yes,
so
exactly.
Yeah, I get that. I totally get that. And something we were talking about before we started recording was primary ovarian insufficiency, premature ovarian failure. All these conditions, those are sort of used interchangeably now, but that condition versus early perimenopause or early menopause, I feel like there's a little bit of confusion around that. And I feel like what's really interesting too is that POI has definitely risen, or at least the incidence of it has risen over the last decade from what I have seen with the numbers. And so I'm just curious from you, how you differentiate those and, those and what you have been experiencing.
Yeah, for sure. So it's a really interesting conversation to have, because previously, medically, we would look at premature ovarian insufficiency as we know it now, but we know that it was premature ovarian failure previous, which just does not sound really fun at all, does it? When, you hear those words failure, it's kind of like, well, what did I fail at? What did I do wrong? Or
Yeah, like,
how
why
did
are
I
my
cause
ovaries
this? Or
failing?
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I know. I think that's why they changed the name, actually, right? I believe that's why.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we moved away, which again, we've got to be thankful for, that actually we're making progress, right? That's still a part of progress, that we've come away from using that kind of non-truthful form of premature ovarian failure to premature ovarian insufficiency. And when we look at what that really truly is, medically, there are some doctors that will deem me to have POI. I don't deem it to be premature ovarian insufficiency, to the point that it's probably more normal than we realize for women in their mid to late 30s to experience changes in hormonal balancing and profiling. It's just that we are either normally so incredibly busy with life that we don't recognize it, or we put it down to, I've got a young family, or I have caring duties, a career, I'm tired, I'm itchy because I've changed my washing powders or liquids. I've, changed something up within my lifestyle, which is causing me stress. So we always think about but it's probably because of. So when we think about POI, medically, we would look at that as anything that has indicated that the ovaries are no longer functioning optimally.
Right.
Then when we unpack what does optimally mean, right? The levels in our estradiol, our testosterone, potentially our progesterone levels are changing, they're decreasing. So to answer that question, and it's a little bit of a nuanced one, isn't it? I don't class myself as having POI. I class myself as probably being very much normal, and that early perimenopause was detected. But I equally do not class myself as having early perimenopause. I do massively believe that the more we invest in female research, the more we're going to find that it's quite normal in our mid-30s for our hormones to start changing, not in our 40s.
Right. Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I feel like we see that a lot. I guess one of my questions about this, and it's just sort of like my own personal curiosity, is around the fact that our world is obviously very different now than it was 30, 50, 100 years ago. We are exposed to so many more environmental triggers, factors that influence our health really negatively. And so I just wonder, is that what's creating this new normal? Is that what's happening here? Because we look at, it's funny, I was just looking at this study yesterday that my husband had shared with me. He saw it, and I guess because he keeps up on women's and men's fertility and health.
Yeah, great.
part of the, like just doing the work in this world. But he was talking about this study that they did on men who use their cell phones. I think it's like 20 times a day versus men who use their cell phones like once or twice a week, once a week, maybe. It was a crazy study. And they had like a fifth of the sperm count that men who don't use their cell phones really at all had. And that, is mind-boggling. Obviously, there are multiple other factors potentially, but I do feel like, are we just creating this new normal? Like, what do you think is happening here?
Yeah, gosh, this is a big question, isn't it?
I know. Sorry, girl.
No, of course. It's my brain's just like, whoa, there's so much in there.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. If we take it back to when I was doing my nutritional qualification, so as a nutritionist, something that we come across a lot is the blue zones. And it's this whole phenomena around the blue zones of the world where we have the highest rates of centurions, so people living to 100 plus, disease-free, ailment-free, and they're living lives where some of them, like the Kitovans, and they're really living on high volumes of either dietary fats or high volumes of carbohydrate intake. So thinking back into that space, one of the points that's very relevant to this is when we get asked around, should we go fully organic or does it not matter? There's massive amounts of studies around all of this, many contradicting each other. But one of the big things that I recall from studying this was there are many fields that grow organic produce, but not far from those fields, there'll be genetically modified farms and fields. And we can't stop the environment transferring some of those fertilizers and the air, the wind, the animal, we will naturally have that transfer over. So when we think about organic foods, they're never 100% organic. It's impossible. They cannot be. However, that being said, we know that with the additions of antibiotics, for example, into our animal products, higher rates of pesticides and pesticides and genetically modified fertilizers that are used, we have some impacts that come from that. So I don't think that this is a question that can be answered as much as a yes, it's definitely what we've done, because there's been some massive advancements in health as well that help us within general health, not just women's health, but environmental, excuse me, environmental factors like exogenous amounts of estrogens, for example, we can get those through plastics.
Yeah.
So if we're not using BPA free, for example, or we're going, glass is much better if we can use glass. So instead of a plastic Tupperware to heat our food up, then looking at potentially using gas if we can't pop it into a pan and heat it up that way. So I do think that there are elements to lifestyle, choice, environmental factors. Do you live in the city? Do you live in a countryside? Those definitely have impacts on our overall health and well-being. And we definitely know, because you and I are in this space, that those have an impact and an influence around the hormonal profiling of the female genetics of our DNA and of our endocrine.
Yeah, for sure. That's what I keep thinking. Is there, I feel like we have these genetic weak links, each of us, whatever it might be, whether it's your joints or your thyroid or your ovaries, it could be multiple things. And I do think, like some of us are just more impacted than others. And so, yes. And then ultimately we end up with, an earlier perimenopause, for instance, than other people might. So it makes sense.
Look at the impacts that stress has on us as well. If you take, and we can never do this study, of course, and we don't have these studies, but you take two identical twins. Okay. I've got identical twins in my house. So my girls, identical 13-year-old twin girls, if we were to monitor them, and we were to agree, this just ethically would not happen, and I would never agree to it, and neither would they. But if you were to then say, okay, Clara, you're going to live the life of the individual who just, does whatever you want. You don't need to think about your lifestyle and your health. You're going to go and live in the biggest city. You're going to have all, the technology of the world, and you're just going to live life in the fast lane. So grab and go lifestyle. You're not really going to exercise. And then Shannon, we say, right, okay, Shannon, you're going to live really purposefully here. You're going to select where you live. You're going to, grow your own produce as much as possible. Your lifestyle is going to allow for you to do that and not live in the fast lane. You're going to have really low levels of stress. You're going to sleep beautifully. Yeah. And you're not really going to need to supplement so much, because you're going to get everything you need through the foods and the lifestyle you lead. What would the outcome of both of those be, given they're identical twins, but they obviously do have their own genetical pathway? They're not 100% identical. There's a hypothesis that Clara would actually end up with more disease and ailments and problems, and potentially faster aging skin. We may see that her cellular health isn't as great as Shannon's, who lives high up in the mountains where the air is clear and the water's fresh. So I do believe that we have choice every single day, if we're mindful about that choice, on where we live, what we do, how we show up for our body. But ultimately, yes, we've advanced as humans. Every household has 1 to 2 cars, whereas previously that wasn't the case. But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I would love to have more research in this space done to typically look at the functionality of the female endocrine system, not just the sex hormones, to see, you know, what does that do to the hypothalamus? What do we see within the endocrine, you know, full system, and the pituitary and the adrenals? Do we see changes within there, enhancements in certain ways? But this is where, you know, a lot of what I tend to look at for my own health as a now 40-year-old woman, but 35 at the time. So I've had 5 years of really living through the changes, has been to really double down on what I know intuitively and instinctively works well. So plant-based foods. I do eat animal product as well because of the complete protein sources that I know my body wants and needs. It's choice. But equally, it's in breath work and showing up and giving our body oxygen levels that it needs. Beautifully so, my family and I take 3 to 4 breaks every single year up to the north of Scotland into half an acre of private forest land. And we're super abundantly blessed that we can do that, to breathe clean air and to take ourselves away from technology, because there is no phone signal, no Wi-Fi, there's no 3G, 4G, you name, you're off the grid when you are in that forest. It's just
I'm sure
a
your
small
teenagers love that.
they hate it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they really hate it. But it's that whole fun thing of saying, right, well, get a jigsaw out. Let's play, you know, some board games together. We can watch a movie. We've got like a DVD player up there. So it's about taking ourselves back to actually grounding ourselves again. They witness me up there just completely detaching from everything. And my kind of chill levels are just so like, yes, that is my gift back to my body around how we can make those choices. And, you know, again, I know I'm super abundantly blessed to live in Scotland where the air is clean, but equally I'm in a city right now. So yeah, it's arguable, isn't it?
It is. I know. And it's just like we've said, right? It's nuanced and there are a lot of layers and factors that play into this. So I'm glad that we talked about it though, because I was curious what your perspective is, because you are one of few people who are speaking very openly about your experience. And so it'll be really interesting to see if, you know, this becomes, first of all, if we do more research and this becomes more prevalent and we start to have more conversations around this topic. And one of the main things we wanted to talk about, though, on this episode was some of what you've just been describing, which is the food lifestyle piece of all of this, right? How do our ovaries respond to all of these things? And one of the biggest issues that I hear over and over again, and definitely something that's come up for me as well, is during perimenopause and menopause, we tend to experience changes in weight that are quite shocking. They totally suck. And, you know, it's so interesting. I've definitely put on weight in the last couple of years, particularly. I just turned 44 in September. And it just feels, not that I need to lose a ton of weight or I'm always trying to lose weight or anything like that, but it definitely feels a lot harder if you go on vacation and you put on some weight. It just doesn't, it's not the same, not at all. And so I feel like I'm a bit of a cliche, but it's just true. So I'm wondering about the hormonal interplay. I think that people listening would love to hear about this. You know, the idea that insulin resistance is, you know, much more prevalent during this perimenopause window, particularly in your 40s. Obviously at any time, really, if you're in perimenopause, ultimately, because your sex hormones influence your entire endocrine system. So can we talk a little bit about that, like the prevalence of this and the challenges associated with it?
For sure, definitely. So where to start with this one? It's a really interesting piece. And I would say that about 97% of I only know this because of our team recently done a kind of collection around, well, what are we finding is the majority of conversations or cries for help that we receive? And around 97%, it was like 97.2% of inquiries that we receive is around weight loss. And we are not, so I do not diet women. I'm not a weight loss coach and that I would be like, yes, great, here's a diet plan and off you go and lose some weight. It's more around, okay, so you're coming to me expressing that you've gained some unwanted body fat, but actually the problem isn't with the body fat gain, it's with how it's making you feel about yourself. So the confidence in yourself, the motivation, the sassiness, right? We get to feel sassy and vibrant. And menopause is almost that opportunity for us as women to then go, oh, whoa, wait a minute. I'm feeling and experiencing and seeing unwanted changes in how my body is. So what do I need to do to help myself through that? And for some women, it's easy to just accept and say, well, actually, I'm enjoying having additional weight on. Fewer than the other ladies that will then say, well, I don't like this. Yeah, my clothes don't fit me. And one of my current clients actually explained this so beautifully. She said, Adele, I feel like I have closet trauma. I open the closet and I get traumatized by all the clothes that are hanging there that I love, that I've spent and invested money on to have because they're favorites, and can't wear them because they do not fit. So closet trauma was one of the ones that I'd never heard the phrase before and thought, those two words are so powerful of expressing how that can feel when we change body composition and gain weight. So let's talk a little bit about then what is happening in the body and why we experience this. And then we can touch upon insulin resistance. So when we think about the changes in the body through perimenopause, we think about 4 stages of menopause. We've got the pre-menopause stage where we are probably not even aware of menopause at that age. Although we are making menopause way more mainstream now, so more conversations are happening. But let's say you're in your teenage years to your 20s, you're having a beautiful, natural monthly cycle, and life is great hormonally. We then start to experience some changes, and around about that time, we might see that our menstrual cycle is changing. So maybe our flow becomes heavier or lighter. Our bleed window changes. So our menstrual window may become longer or shorter. We may have more painful periods, or they're not as painful as they once were. So anything that's a change, a whole host of symptoms that we'll not run through right now, but there are over 40 to 50 different symptoms that a lot of women experience through menopause and perimenopause. So the reason this is happening is we're experiencing a change in our key sex hormones, estrogen, particularly, as we know, estrogen is plural, but it's our estradiol part of our estrogen that is really having a rapid decline during perimenopause. And I like to name estradiol as our queen bee. So she is like the queen bee hormone in all of our estrogens that provides our body with support for hundreds of functions, not just around fertility. Yeah. Bone protection, heart protection. These are all proven protections from estradiol. So as that hormone starts to decline, we then have an impact because we have these beautiful things called estrogen receptors inside our body. And I like to visualize. So if we think of those estrogen receptors as the claw in the claw machine that you go to when you go to any arcades, and you're kind of trying to pick up the teddy that you ultimately never win. Never. So never put your money in that machine.
So true.
Yeah. Telling the kids this all the time. You're not going to win it. They're rigged. You're not going to win it. So think of it like the claw, the grabbing machine. And these estrogen receptors are collecting the estrogen around the body and utilizing it for brain function, eyes, skin, beautifully from head to toe. But as they're grabbing and estradiol levels are dropping, they're not receiving. Therefore, we have impacts. Hello symptoms. This is ultimately what's happening. So as part of that, we may experience fatigue and tiredness. And as a result of that, we may not move as much as we had done previously. Or if we are still frequent with our movement, we might not have the same output level. Yeah, we might drop a set in the gym or a repetition or two. We might not walk as far or run as long or as fast. So this can have an impact on the output that we do, and therefore the stimulus of the bone and muscle. And if that starts to happen, we can experience some metabolic change, which basically directly means that we're having a metabolism change, a slowdown, and we can lose some muscle volume. Yeah, it's very small, but it happens. And ultimately, the way that I teach this with Inside Our certification is to show that the more muscle volume that we have as women, the higher the requirement of energy. So calories. Yeah, we will still be as hungry. We may still eat the same volume of food, but if we're not moving as much as we did to the same output as we did, and we're potentially losing muscle volume, there's a lesser requirement for energy in the body, but we're still eating the same as we always have done, if not slightly more, to compensate for the feelings of lethargy, fatigue, tiredness, and comfort. A lot of us will eat for comfort, and that's not a bad thing. It just means that we have to look at the root cause of the change.
Yeah.
So that gives us a little insight into what's happening in the body.
Yeah, no, it's super helpful to hear it described in that way. You mentioned energy issues during this time, and I would love for you to elaborate on that. Like, what is happening? Why are women having more issues with consistent energy throughout this time period?
Yeah. So we can find that a lot of women, and there hasn't been studies, randomized control trial studies to that gold standard that we would love to be able to get our hands on and review. They will come. I know they will. But when we think about observations, and we can observe those that we know, whether they be clients, we can observe ourselves. And speaking from experience, but also from a very professional standpoint of working with hundreds of women already through this, I recognized myself that it wasn't just as easy as saying, but just time block your gym session, put your shoes on, your sneakers, your trainers, your runners, and go. That in theory is brilliant, right? Time block the gym's in there. It's going to give me a reminder. My stuff's lying. I'm going to get changed after work and I'm going to go and do it. But what happens is we might then find that that particular period of our perimenopausal journey is really truly kicking our ass. Yeah, we're sore. We're really tired. We're maybe feeling a little bit aggressive because actually there's a lot of changes happening cognitively for us, emotionally, physically. For me, it became really challenging, and I gained quite a bit of weight initially because I didn't move as much. I went from training 6 days resistance weights training because I was an ex-competitive bodybuilder at that time when I first got confirmed with perimenopause, to training once a week. I just could not psychologically take myself there. I had social anxiety out of nowhere. So stepping into a gym was just one of the worst trauma times. It was like a crisis mode. I actually struggled a lot with driving. So I had that driving anxiety of, what if I have a crash, or what if I forget the way? There was a lot of really fearful moments that would come. So the psychological aspects of our symptoms can sometimes control our physical. And for me, a lot of my symptoms were vaginal. So having really impacting vaginal symptoms meant that I had dryness, swelling, I had soreness and itching, to the point that I couldn't even wear underwear, let alone put on a pair of gym leggings with a big seam. I couldn't sit down properly. So even attempting to do something like lunges or squats would have been far too painful. So I did what every other woman does, and I retracted away, and I spent time just doing what I could do, but ultimately resulting in my body requiring less amount of food or energy, but me still consuming the same amount, if not more at times, because the fatigue would take over. And I would ultimately turn to either the chocolate bar or the biscuit tin for what the brain is saying. Adele, I need sugar. I need glucose, right?
Exactly.
I want you to feed me that Kit Kat because I need some glucose right now.
Yep. Oh my God, yes. It's very relatable. And yeah, it's so interesting because we all know this, right? When we feel tired, when we don't have energy, the first thing that you want to eat is sugar, refined carbohydrates, just carbs, period. So it makes sense. So I feel like all of these things compound, and then you end up in the situation that you're in. So
Exactly.
what are your thoughts on this? Like, how can women who are in perimenopause, in menopause particularly, start to navigate weight management, in a healthy and sustainable way?
Yeah. Be very gentle with yourself. So probably top tip number one is to be very gentle with yourself, both physically and emotionally. Yeah, if we tell ourselves that we're failing at something, or we tell ourselves that we're guilty for something, I'm guilty, oh, I never went to the gym, I feel so bad. Or that's another night that I've constantly been having half a bar of this chocolate every night. Number one is we actually can see that in the psychology space of research, I'm studying my master's in psychology and human behavior now, but in the psychology of research, what we find is those that speak negatively, whether that's internal voice or you express it in voice verbally, are more likely to feel shame and guilt, which will more likely result in further negative actions and behaviors. And those actions and behaviors may be self-sabotaging. Those actions and behaviors may have you turn to substances like alcohol to find that I just need this one glass of wine to relax or to get a better sleep. Yeah. So there's that element of awareness. So number one would be, let's not hold ourselves in account of shame or guilt. Be very gentle and loving. Number two would be around, we ultimately having a very vibrant sense of self-awareness and mindful approach would be then to think about what can you achieve. Okay, so rather than focus on, well, I can't get to the gym today, what can you do? Yeah, can you, if you're working from home, instead of using the bathroom that's directly next to your home office, can you take the stairs and go up to the top floor of your home if your bathroom's on the top floor? It's simple little movements in the day that will help. Can you build in a morning and an evening commute if you're working from home? So you don't actually physically start your working day until you've gone out and done a loop round the block. Yeah. 10 minutes is better than no minutes. Ideally 30, but 10 minutes is better than no minutes. Yeah. So we want to build an intention, and it's being mindful with how we show up. Yeah. And then probably point number three, when we think about the core pillars of any type of weight gain or weight loss, this is a big argument at the moment within the health and fitness space, and personal trainers will say, but it's just the energy equation. It's energy in and energy out.
Yes,
Right?
I hear
You
that all the
balance
time
that,
on social media. Yes.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. And whilst we are not here to point fingers and say, well, no, you're wrong, technically everybody is correct within that, but then everybody can equally be wrong. So yes, the energy balance and the energy equation is important, but actually it's so much deeper than that. When we enter into menopause, we're dealing with hormonal dysfunction, which is quite a statement to make. It's declining at such a rate for some women that they are emotionally and physically very unwell. We can't then just say, it's fine, just move more and eat less. So what we need to be able to do with that is to help women to see that nothing is off limits. If you want to have the chocolate in the day, then you do it, but you do it guilt and shame free, mindfully. Because when we teach that kind of mindful mentality, you are less likely to binge. You are less likely to feel negative connection to that being a good or bad food. And you're less likely to overconsume. So if you give yourself one square of chocolate in the day and you allow it, and you enjoy it, you don't just quickly shove it in so no one can see, then you are actually more likely to succeed in your goals than if you were to tell yourself, I cannot have any refined carbohydrates in my food. There's not a lot of women succeed in their weight loss by cutting out entire food types or groups.
Yeah. And if they do succeed, then they usually put it back on because you just can't sustainably do that. It doesn't make any sense.
Within 18 months, the research shows us that those that do lose weight can gain around 70% of the weight, some of them 120% of the weight within 18 months if they have used a restrictive approach to their diet.
Yeah, that is no good. You said something a little while ago about hormonal dysfunction in menopause. And, this brings up all of my thoughts around, again, our society. And I just feel like, has it always been this way? Because my sense from many conversations with women in their late 30s and early to mid 40s and older as well, but mostly that age group, is that we are coming into this time of our lives in such a state of depletion that we are having more symptoms and more severe symptoms than ever really before. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that, because it does feel like, does it really need to be this way? I always get the sense that, the level of suffering at every stage of the menstrual life cycle is just sort of accepted and acceptable. And I just wish that I feel like women really need to up their expectations for their health.
I do agree with that. I also believe that there's probably a lot of women out there that have never had the opportunity of awareness.
Oh, totally. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that this is where, when we kind of, it's so difficult. And I don't want to sound like I'm sitting on the fence with it, because if we think about the more privileged women that get the education around all of this, and they have, access to social media and all of the platforms that we can learn from, then yes. And I say this very bluntly, I massively advocate that as women, we should know our bodies better than any professional or medical professional or consultant ever should or can. And we should never expect that the medical consultants and GPs should know our body better than ourselves. It's ours, right? We live with, this is ours. So I'm a massive advocate of the fact that if you expect your GP to know about how you are feeling, you are already failing yourself. So making sure that you are choosing to learn. Yeah. And there will be two types of people: the people that go, ooh, that's quite hard hitting. Yeah, I'm going to start learning about my own body and what is my endocrine system and what does it do? Yeah. Then there'll be the other person who goes, well, I don't actually care, so I'm not going to do anything with that. And that's choice. Then we have the group of people who, and there's multiples, who do not have access to the knowledge and the awareness and the understanding. So they will suffer through in silence and believe that that's just what has to happen. I read a lot, obviously, in the menopause space, and there was this whole debate about why are women experiencing severe symptoms now when they've never experienced it in the past.
I feel like they have been experiencing it. Yeah. And been shut down. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't believe that it's not clean cut. It's not black and white to say, well, in the Victorian years, women never got menopausal symptoms. Yes, they did. But actually, they didn't live long enough into post-menopause life for it to ever really be a thing. It was never, average age of the Victorian woman was about 52, 53 years old, and she would die, right? That's about the time that we're in post-menopause. And actually, they used to send ladies to the doctors with hysteria.
Yes.
Right? You're losing your mind. You've gone hysterical, and then you're dead. That's ultimately, it's tough. But when we think about the impacts that this is having, us as women are more vocal. We demand and expect more. We want more. We value more. And I massively believe that as women, we've been experiencing trouble from our pre-menopause, so our menstrual years, right through to post-menopause. And we've just not had the platform to be a bit vulnerable and express that that's not okay with how I feel. I want help.
Yeah. I think it's so multifaceted. I completely agree with you. I feel like this is a conversation we had recently, maybe with some other women's health practitioners, about women going into pregnancy extremely depleted, much more so than really ever before, due to the external stressors that we are all exposed to now. I mean, I feel like it's a bit of an unprecedented time where we're much more stressed collectively than we were, say, 50, 100 years ago. I mean, we have different stressors, really. So like I said, so it feels like it just sort of spans, like I said, all of the different phases of our life cycle. And so right. And so I agree with you, though, what you said as well, right? That there's just been such a lack of education that women end up in these situations because they just had no idea. And we see this as practitioners, right, all the time. And it is enraging, so infuriating to watch this happen over and over and over again. But I did want to switch back to the perimenopause, menopause weight gain issue and talk a little bit about the exercise piece, because I know you touched on it a little bit, but I would love to talk about what kind of exercises, what kind of fitness routines make the most sense for someone who's in this time. Obviously, there are caveats and nuances to this approach, but I am curious, what you feel is a useful takeaway for someone who is listening to what we're talking about.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so there are some things to know, and you will know your own body and how well you feel and your mobility. But we have to be mindful that 1 in 2 women postmenopausal will develop osteoporosis. And that's a really, really hard stat, because we also know that if we are, for those that don't know what osteoporosis is, it's ultimately the wastage and the breaking down, brittling of our bones. So if we think about that, it's our skeleton, it's our framework for mobility. Along with that, we can have sarcopenia, which is the wastage of muscle, which we touched upon previously. So mobility becomes compromised, and that can have a really big impact on our emotional and psychological well-being as well. So given that, we know that there are some elements to nutrition that can help with it, which proteins are a really big intake for women during menopausal years, as well as good healthy fats. But when we talk about exercise and movement, we must build in some form of resistance movement training. Okay, you don't have to go to a gym and you don't have to lift heavy weights, but considering that you can do resistance movements pretty much most parts of the everyday. Yeah, if you are going out a walk, for example, you can put some additional weight into the body through maybe ankle weights. There are some amazing weighted vests that some people feel work really well for them. I tend to go with a little backpack, and I'll walk to the shops, pick up some essentials of foods, and walk back. Normally it's weighing about 10 kilograms, and I'll walk back and do a half an hour walk with that. So it's about thinking about how you can build in a little bit more resistance movement. You can do it through body weight. So we don't have to go to a gym and we don't have to lift weights, but thinking about things like walking lunges. These are brilliant for stability. Yeah, not advisable if you are unstable on your feet. And you can do a lot if you are someone who is challenged already with mobility. You can do a lot by sitting down and working with resistance bands. So again, there is no excuses. We get to move. I had someone actually, and this really hits home. This is how I'm not brutal, but I'm very, very poignant within what we share with this. But someone had then messaged me saying, well, that's all good and well, but I'm in a wheelchair and I can't move my legs. And I was like, valid point. And I take that into consideration. But let's move your arms then. Let's get your upper body moving. Let's strengthen the upper part of your body. And let's not sit within the victim mentality of I can't, but let's look at what can I do? Where's the positive reframe and what I am able to do? So there's part in all of this where I say that with love, of course,
Obviously.
massive amounts of love, but we have to get out of our mindset of, oh yeah, I can't do that because, okay, maybe you can't do a certain part of a movement or a certain exercise, but you can absolutely do something.
Yeah.
So one top tip to all of this is I ask my ladies during our onboarding, what brings you joy? Okay, what makes you feel happy? I had one woman say to me, I used to be a cheerleader and I love dancing. It's like, great, let's dance, right? Let's move the body, let's dance, let's do some shamanic shaking in there, let's get your heart rate up, but let's also have you doing some in between moves. You'll do some squats, and then we're going to get some bands and we'll do some shoulder press, and we get to have fun with what we do. So what I would say is always build in resistance movement. For heart health, we want to do some cardiovascular based movement like brisk walking. You could go a hill climb. You could go swim. Yeah. Pick something that you enjoy because there's no wrong.
So good. And it's like such a simple yet powerful reminder that we actually have control and we can decide what we want to do and take action around it. And it's actually really quite easy. You're obviously a great coach. I can see why people really love coming to you. I would love to wrap this up with maybe any advice or any insight for women who are just feeling so apprehensive or just have a lot of negative feelings around perimenopause and menopause, because we do often hear that too, right? It's just, it's the worst thing ever. It's worse than any of the other phases. And I think that obviously it just needs a major reframe, like you were saying, with regard to the exercise and movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, first off, your feelings and emotions and thoughts are valid. They're yours and we get to validate them. So however you feel, if you wake up one day and, forgive the language, but you feel really pissed off, you're allowed to feel that way. Yeah. So as part of the positive psychology, so I'm a positive psychology coach, as part of that reframe within the moment, we get to validate the feeling first and foremost. Then, however, we get to say, okay, what do I need right now? So we can either, and there's only an A or B choice to this. A, we can remain within our pity party of wallow, of feeling low, of really, I can't, that lack energy. Or we can take the decision to say, what's one thing in my joy bubble? And your joy bubble is a practice and a task that I teach. But ultimately, what you can do with that is you can chuck a whole load of stuff. You just throw it in that bubble and the bubble holds it. A lot of stuff that just brings you happiness. It could be a favorite pair of socks or a mug that when you look at it, it just makes you smile. It could be a favorite person that when you have a conversation with them, your mood is lifted. But you're encouraged to throw as much as you can in that joy bubble, because option B is that you reframe. Okay, so when you start to feel low, you acknowledge it, you validate the feeling, and then you ask yourself, what makes me happy? And you go and you do the thing. Okay, you wear the socks, you get the mug, you call the person, you take the walk to the forest, you go to the sea, you do what makes you happy in that moment, because in that moment, you're taking the choice to reframe the feeling.
That's just beautifully put. Thank you so, so much. This was an amazing conversation, just like our last one. Can you just share with everyone again, like you did last time, where we can all find your incredible work?
Of course, yes, you can. So I have a podcast called The Menopause Coach. You can find that on all of the platforms. You can also come and speak with me. I am active inside my DMs every single day on Instagram, the.menopausecoach. TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it. So probably the easiest thing is just to go to your platform and type in the.menopausecoach and I will be there.
Amazing. Thanks, Adele. This was so great. I always enjoy chatting with you. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you. Honestly, I feel like we could talk for hours.
I know. I was like, I got to stop this because I know how this is going to go. My podcast producer won't be so happy. So thank you.
Amazing. You are super welcome. Thank you for having me.
That's a wrap. Be sure to click that subscribe button to join me for more Girl Talk Gone Menstrual in upcoming episodes. But in the meantime, check out my latest Period Party episode. And if you're looking for a deeper dive into your hormones, go ahead and take my period quiz at nicolejardim.com/quiz.